forward. So I said, well, you may have a point there. So I wanted to go, and I met these sisters and brothers deep in the forest, or on the edge of the forest, and they told me I was the first African American, the first black person from the United States they had ever met, they had ever laid eyes on in the flesh. And they are miserable people. They've been taken out of the rainforest of the Congo, and they live in this dry, arid area, and the only way they can make money now is to sing and dance for these white tourists. And what they try to do as much as possible is get high. They try to drink and drug themselves into a state of oblivion because they're miserable. And that is something that people who are miserable tend to do. You try to deal with that. I find that among Aboriginal Australians a great deal. They never asked me a single question. They never said, what is life like for black people in the United States? Why did you come here? The only thing they really wanted to know was how much money you're going to give us so we could get some alcohol. And so I was glad to be there. It was historic. But at the same time, it was really, really sad to see how these folk have been degraded to that level. And this is probably what the first modern humans look like. Let's see some other examples, like here. Now, this is a good one. This is a brother who's the object of a movie project that I worked on that never came to fruition. And the movie was going to be on this brother who they call Otabinga the pygmy in the zoo. Otabinga was an African from Central Africa, a so-called pygmy, who was actually put in the monkey cage in the Bronx Zoo. And you can see him posing for a photograph of this chimpanzee. This is around 1905. Eventually, the NAACP protested. Africans in New York were outraged, and eventually he got out and he committed suicide when he was 28 years old. And naturally, Hollywood never made that movie, but they paid me well to do the research. Denzel Washington was involved in that project. This is a very similar person from the Andaman Islands in the Bay of Bengal in the Indian Ocean. And they became somewhat famous in scientific circles during the big tsunami because hardly none of them died. It was like they had almost an inner radar system, and when the tsunami started to approach them, they went to the highlands. And scientists did a lot of research on them and said, this is what the first people in Asia looked like. Especially a team from Stanford University did that. A similar sister in the Philippine Islands. These are little bitty black people. This photograph actually appeared in National Geographic, I think about 1898. And I think she stood about 4 feet 7 inches tall. Now, Sister Hamara, who I was bragging about earlier, actually we were supposed to go together. And at the last minute I didn't go. You would think she would have said, well, Runoko, I've never been there before. I'm a woman. I don't want to go by myself. She went and said, I'll tell you how it turns out. And went and spent time with I'm so proud of her. And spent time with these folk and took pictures with them and talked to them about Africa. And according to what she told me, they don't know anything about Africa. And that's typical of a lot of our people. Okay? They've been away from home for a long time. Like these folk. Here I am in southwest India in the rainforest. These same people, it's little bitty black people who at one time dominated the earth. There's no doubt in my mind that this is what the earliest humanity looked like. And they got isolated in rainforests and islands and deserts and what have you. Now, it's not often I get to really look down on the top of an adult's head. And it doesn't feel bad. I kind of felt empowered there for a minute. And I am in the southern part of India, and I had been warned that I was in danger before I went. So I had these talismans. There's an image, a little ankh, not an ankh, but a pendant of Osiris. And I had these red, black, and green beads and an ankh there, and I had a little statue of the Buddha that had been dipped in the Ganges River in my pocket because I was told before I went to India on this trip that I was in grave danger and had to be very careful. I told a friend of mine that. He said, Runoko, damn that, what you need is a knife. Well, I wasn't going over there with no metal like that. But I went there and I was driven into the jungle, into the rainforest, and I met these folk, and they looked at me like, what is going on here? Again, never seen anybody like me before. I said, how often do you, I had 3 translators. I said, how often do you all have visitors? He said, visitors? Nobody ever comes here, and if they do, we chase them away with our machetes. Wow. I said, brother, I come in peace. And I grabbed onto that statue of the Buddha in my pocket when I said it. I said, I come in peace. And they took a liking to me, and I spent a day with them. It was quite a phenomenal experience I'll never forget. And at the end of the day, they said, we want you to stay for a week. I said, man, I got to go. But I'll try to come back. And these are the first people on the planet, and these, no doubt in my mind, are typical of the people who came to the Americas 40,000 years before Columbus was a twinkle in anybody's eye. And then this represents, according to Gladwin and according to me, the second wave. And this wave would have been very similar to Aboriginal Australians. And now we're talking about a series of migrations, not one, but a series over a period of thousands of years, out of Africa, into Asia, up the coast, eventually across the Bering into the Americas. This sister is Aboriginal Australian. These are the most spiritual people I've ever been with. I've been with them 6 or 7 times, and they are some deep, deep folk. You're talking about profound. And even she has a spiritual aura about her. She lived in a place called Palm Island, which is an island about 2 hours off the coast of northern Queensland in Australia. I went there last October. She is one of the descendants of the Aboriginal Australians that white folks couldn't do anything with. They would have been the equivalent, I guess, of Maroons. So they put them on this island and kept them in almost in animal-like conditions. They wore dog tags, and they were, even now, it wasn't until January 1967 that Aboriginal Australians were considered humans for the first time. Now I'm going to repeat that. It was not until January 1967, based on a national referendum, that black people in Australia were considered humans by the Australian government. Up to that point, they were officially classified as flora and fauna, as plants and animals. Now, 1967, what's going on in the world? What's going on in the United States? We're burning cities down. And white people in Australia became so afraid of their own Negroes, their own black people, that they said, we're going to give them a few bones. We're going to give them this superficial degree of citizenship because we don't want them to burn Sydney down. We don't want Brisbane to be reduced to ashes. We don't want Melbourne to be a smoking cinder. But the conditions haven't fundamentally changed. Black people make up about 3% of the total population of Australia, and yet they constitute 80% of the prison population. I repeat, 3% of the total population, but 80% of the prison population. You know what that's called? Just us. And we are very familiar with that in the United States, I know. The average life expectancy for a black man in Australia today is 37 years. 37. I love these folk, and I spend as much time with them as I can. When I go to Australia, this is all I want to be with. I asked this sister, maybe something a man should never ask a woman. I asked her as the anthropologist, how old are you? And she said, brother, I don't have any idea. I don't know how old I am. We were never told how old we were. We were never given our birth dates. We never had birth certificates because they were born before 1967. Look at this sister. Isn't that a remarkable photograph? The silver hair, the white dress, the beautiful complexion, and you can't even see the whites of her eyes. She had a very spiritual aura about her. These folk believe that animals take human form. Oh, I could just tell you a lot of stories about that. So now this is my own photograph here. That's a good one, Runoko. But these here, I got from books. Here. And they're going through a rites of passage. And that's what the paint represents. And these are Aboriginal Australians from the north. I hope the next presentation that I give in New York is on the black presence in Australia and the Pacific. It's a fascinating subject. And you know who introduced us to a lot of that? Dr. Ben. Dr. Ben and a brother from Bermuda named Roosevelt Brown did a lot of work on the subject. And we can also play the game Who That Is as we go. Now, the way you play Who That Is, not who is that, who that is when you see somebody that looks like you know, you're supposed to say who that is. These are Aboriginal Australians. And these are Aboriginal Australians. And there's Runoko, of course, you know who that is. But these aren't just any Aboriginal Australians. These are founding members of the Aboriginal Australian Black Panther Party. In 1975, they formed a branch in Brisbane, Australia, of Black Panthers. In the 1920s, according to Tony Martin, they had a branch of the Garvey movement there. Now check that out. Around 1920, there was a branch of the UNIA and ACL. I'm a member of the UNIA now. So I did a lecture in support of a political prisoner, actually more of a speech. And these sisters came to the lecture. This is in a town called Townsville, in Queensland, with the Aboriginal people called KKK country. And I tried to